Hello, it's 5 p.m. local time here in Warsaw. I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News. Russia and Ukraine have exchanged another set of prisoners of war. This time, Moscow and Kyiv exchanged 84 prisoners each. According to Ukraine's report, the group freed by Russia was made up of both civilians and soldiers. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said some of the freed prisoners have been in Russian custody since 2014. Zelensky emphasized that all freed prisoners need medical attention as well as serious rehabilitation. The prisoners freed by Kyiv are all said to be now in Belarus receiving medical and psychological help. US President Donald Trump warns of severe consequences for Russia if it continues to block peace in Ukraine during Friday's meeting in Alaska. The European leaders are intensifying efforts to convince Trump to not allow Russia to redraw Ukrainian borders.
Donald Trump says Vladimir Putin is going to face consequences if he doesn't agree to stop the war in Ukraine during the meeting in Alaska on Friday.
There will be consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences.
Trump also said a second meeting with Putin could follow if the first one goes well. His comments followed a conversation with European leaders who are appealing to Donald Trump to not let Russia change Ukraine's borders by force. Trump assured his partners that his priority is to achieve a ceasefire and that he wouldn't make territorial concessions to Russia without Ukraine's involvement.
Fundamental European and Ukrainian security interests must be safeguarded in Alaska. That was the message we Europeans conveyed to US President Trump. And I can say that we were in broad agreement both on the assessment of the current situation and on the achievable goal for next Friday.
According to a report by Politico, U.S. President Donald Trump told the European leaders that the U.S. could provide Ukraine with security guarantees.
Now it seems that Donald Trump really does understand, not just talking about it, but really he understands that no real deal may be made, especially in very sensitive areas of territory, but not only, that no deals may be made without Ukraine.
The diplomatic efforts continue in the build-up to the meeting, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in London today.
Europe really stood behind Zelensky. Europe kind of awakened, started to rearm itself. We have this, additional budget of close to 800 million euros. So with all of it, the meeting between Trump and Putin can actually go much better for Europe than it would have has it happened like 6 months ago.
According to Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, more is at stake in Alaska than just Ukraine.
The Russian side would very much like to include also the topic of security and defense posture of not only Ukraine, but also countries like Poland in its talks and negotiations, and in the final arrangements when it comes to peace in Ukraine.
The Russian delegation to Alaska includes the foreign minister, a presidential advisor, plus the ministers of defense and finance, as well as the CEO of Russian Direct Investment Fund. The summit will be held at the Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage. The presidents will talk one-on-one, accompanied just by their translators. The talks are then to be continued in the expanded format, including aides and government officials.
Polish President Karol Nawrocki and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk have wrapped up the first face-to-face meeting since Nawrocki took office. The meeting in question was requested by Tusk. Our reporter Sonia Gadabiszczan was at the center of the events and brings us more about the talks and what preceded them.
In a face-to-face meeting in the presidential palace behind me, the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and the Polish President Karol Nawrocki discussed the situation in Ukraine and other international issues. This meeting took place against the backdrop of the Wednesday conference calls between the European and U.S. leaders and ahead of the Friday meeting in Alaska between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. All of these discussions had Ukraine as the central subject. On Wednesday, it was Donald Tusk that represented Poland in the call between the European leaders and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. A familiar setup considering that Tusk has represented Poland in similar discussions thus far. But in the subsequent call with the US President Donald Trump and the Vice President J.D. Vance, it was Karol Nawrocki who represented the country. Tusk commented on the situation and said that according to the Polish constitution, it is the government that conducts foreign policy and not the president. However, at the request of the American side, which prefers to conduct diplomacy at the presidential level, it was eventually Karol Nawrocki who represented Poland in that call. Ahead of the meeting with Nawrocki, Tusk highlighted the importance of cooperation, acknowledging that the discussions surrounding Ukraine also pertain to Poland's and European security. From Warsaw, for TVP World, I'm Sonia Gataviszczyn.
Former Polish presidential candidate Marek Woch announced that he will merge his political party, the National Federation of Non-Partisan Local Governments, with the pro-Russian Movement for a Great Poland in September. The group plans to win seats in Poland's parliament in 2027. The merger has drawn attention because of the backgrounds of two senior figures in the movement for a Great Poland. Dawid Chudziec has lived in Russian-occupied Donetsk since 2014, working for pro-Kremlin outlets, while Dawid Berezicki was sanctioned by Ukraine in 2015 for collaborating with the same agency as Chudziec and later helped organize Moscow-funded pro-Russian demonstrations. Their involvement has raised questions about the ideological position and the future priorities of Woch's alliance. Peter Magyar, chairman of Hungary's opposition TISA party, has denounced a claim by Russian intelligence that he is backed by the EU, calling it a blatant election interference and disinformation.
The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service has alleged that the European Union is working to bring Peter Magyar to power in Hungary, possibly as early as the spring 2026 elections. A claim Hungarian public media published without alteration. In response, Magyar underlined that the TISA party's battle against the Fidesz party is in name of an independent Hungary, while the party itself rejected the Russian statement as obvious disinformation.
Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda has submitted Inga Ruginienė's candidacy for the Prime Minister office to the Parliament for approval. The pick follows the recent resignation of former Prime Minister Paluckas, triggered by corruption allegations. Ruginienė, the current Lithuanian Labour Minister, has been tapped for the new role by the Social Democratic Party of Lithuania, which constitutes the majority in the ruling centre-left coalition. Should she become Prime Minister, Ruginienė has pledged to uphold social democratic values by raising the minimum wage, indexing social assistance and improving conditions for low-income families. If the Parliament approves the new Prime Minister, her new cabinet should be presented within 15 days. The ongoing political negotiations indicate that not only the composition of the government will change, but also that of the ruling coalition. Certain regions in the Russian Federation are reducing restrictions on the jobs migrants can perform due to workforce shortages. Still, some regional rules leave foreigners looking for work in Russia scratching their heads. In an effort to combat labor migration, some regions in the Russian Federation have forbidden foreigners from working as bakers, gym staff, hairdressers, tour guides, couriers, taxi or bus drivers, teachers or cooks. Given the autonomy of local governments in Russia's many regions, foreigners who came to the country to seek a better life have a hard time wrapping their heads around what they can and cannot do. These hyper-specific restrictions, however, are slowly disappearing given a shortage in the workforce, as thousands of Russians are being drafted and sent off to the Ukrainian front, leaving vital jobs unmanned. And that's all the news for now. Thank you for watching. The Bottom Line with Marie Cater is coming up next.